He said he really discovered when he walked with Christ, when we came to know Jesus, the two things he really discovered was why he existed and what he's supposed to be doing with his life. And you guys, there really isn't any more important question that we can answer. There's really not anything else in life that we need to know more than why we're here. Because it can't just be that a collision happened and we got here by accident. It can't just be that we're just floating through life and one day we're going to die and then that's it. That can't possibly be the answer. And so what we're going to do tonight is look in Galatians chapter 4, starting in verse 3. The Apostle Paul is writing and he says this: "So also we, while we were children, were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world." Basically what Paul is saying is that we used to be people who served sin. In the book of Romans, Paul talks about sin, and every time he mentions it, he uses the word bondage or slavery or captivity to emphasize the fact that those who have not accepted Jesus, those who have not believed on the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross, are living in bondage. Paul says that I am chained to sin before Christ. And so when he uses the word here in Galatians, it's the same idea. Sin is bondage. And what is sin exactly? The Hebrew word for sin was the idea of missing the mark. It was the idea that if you take a bow and arrow and you shoot it and you're heading for the target and it falls short, you miss the target. That's how the Hebrew Bible defined sin. Anything that misses the mark. And the mark is perfection. The mark is Jesus Christ. The mark is that if I did everything exactly the way God wanted me to, but I don't, so I sin. I miss the mark. And because of that, I'm held in bondage. I'm held in captivity and slavery to my wrong choices, to my sinful nature, to my lust, to my deceit, to my lies. So also we, while we were children, were held in bondage under the elemental things of the world. But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his Son, Jesus, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those under the law. This idea of the law, you guys, is basically, in the old Hebrew scriptures, they set up the law. God established the law basically to keep man in check. He sent the law down through Moses and through other people who penned out the law to keep humanity in check, to establish an order to say, this is what I expect. These are the type of things I'm looking for in those who are going to make good choices, right choices with their lives. But did you know that before we sinned in the Garden of Eden, before Adam and Eve sinned, there was only one rule. There was no law. There was no commandment. The only rule was don't touch that one tree, right? The law was established because of our sin. The law came hundreds of years later. It was not God's original intent. But because we sin, because we do what we want to do and not what he wants us to do, God set up the law for us to have something to strive for us to have something to keep us in check and to follow. And that's what Jesus was born into a society that followed the law. Jesus' parents followed the law. His brothers followed the law. These were all people who had sin natures and still had to obey the rules. Okay? I think we're in the middle of verse 5. Beginning of verse 5. So that he might redeem those who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. I have a buddy back home. His name is Tim. He was born in Seoul, South Korea. And he was adopted when he was like 3 days old to white American parents. And he struggled with the idea of adoption for a long, long time. And I don't know if any of you guys in here are adopted. But it's a little bit difficult. It was for Tim not knowing his parents, not knowing who he was born to, not growing up in the culture that he was born into. He's South Korean. He looks Asian, but his parents are white. He grew up in a white community, in a white society. And he struggled for a long time not knowing who his parents were. But recently, as Tim has kind of grown up and come to know the Lord more, he realized the idea of adoption means that someone who doesn't naturally love you because they're not your parents, someone who isn't, parents are supposed to love their children. Someone else decided to love him and adopt him and take him in, even though he's not naturally theirs. They love him, and they are his parents. And this idea of adoption is what God has done to us. Okay? But here's the backward thing. We could go on for this for a long time. I'll try not to. Here's the crazy thing. When God created us, we were his from the beginning, right? Then we rebelled, and we decided that we don't want anything to do with God. And then what he did, rather than saying, fine, go ahead, do whatever you want. He then came to die for us and adopt us back into the family where we should have been from the first place if we never sinned. And you guys, real quick, that just speaks to the incredible love of God. The fact that even when we pushed him away, he still went the extra mile to adopt us as his sons and as his daughters, simply because he loves us. And he didn't want us to push him away forever. He wanted to make a way for us to be in his family again, the way we were supposed to be from the beginning. Verse 6, because you are sons, God sent forth the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. So you guys, because of our sin, we should be slaves. But because Christ died for us and loved us enough to do that, He then adopted us as His sons. And now, what's the difference between a son and a slave? A slave, in this sense, was more like an employee. It wasn't like we think of slavery. A slave, in this sense, was someone who is indebted to and works for someone in an employer-employee relationship. They have no right to the inheritance. When the dad dies, the slave gets no money. Okay? They also don't get to sit at the family table and eat dinner. They sleep in a different house and they eat their own food. So we went from not part of the family, not part of the inheritance, not part of the good food, living in the smaller house, slave status, to brought into the family of God as sons and as daughters. And you guys, that's our identity. That is your identity, a son or a daughter of the King. And it's so easy not to see it that way sometimes, because we know us, right? In your verse for the summer in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, I persecuted the church. I did those things. I killed Christians. But how can I be called an apostle? How can I be called a messenger of the gospel? Paul wrote almost half the New Testament after he got done killing Christians. How easy would it have been for Paul to go, nah, man, I ain't no son. But Paul, rather than looking in the mirror and going, I see a sinner, I see a murderer, I see a killer, he looked in the mirror and said, I see someone who was created by God, and no one else is going to define me, including myself, other than God. Paul believed that he was an apostle, and that he and we who have accepted Jesus are sons and daughters, not based on the fact that we always act like sons and daughters, but simply based on the fact that God said we are sons and daughters. You guys, when you begin to grasp that, when you begin to embrace the truth of the situation rather than how you feel about it, man, there is so much freedom in that. Because I know, you guys, I know the things that I was thinking about today that are not honoring to God. I know the things that I said today that are not honoring to God. And it's so easy for me to go, how can I be a son? I still feel like I'm in slavery. But if I'm going to be a Christian, and if I'm going to say that Jesus is my Lord, then that means I have to believe Him. And what He said was that I'm a son. You guys are sons and daughters of God. You guys, there's such peace in that. There really is. There's such freedom and peace in knowing that you don't have to keep striving and keep trying and earn anything. God already sees you as a son if you give your life to Him. He already sees you as a daughter if you give your life to Him. No matter how you see yourself or how others see you, they can't change God's mind. So that's the first part, right? That's the first part of the question. Well, what am I? Right? I'm a son, I'm a daughter of the King. But now what? What do we do with that? It's a difficult question to answer in a group like this because it's going to be very different for every single person. Some of us are going to be called into full-time ministry, pastors, deacons, elders, church workers, you're work in the nursery, stuff like that. Others are going to be called to the workforce. Some of us might be called to work, like I work at Target right now. Some of us might be called to work as a plumber, or as a store manager, or as anything. Your individual pursuit of the Lord is going to look very different in your own life. And once you seek Him, or the longer you get to know Him, He'll reveal that to you, I promise you. He's not trying to hide it from you. He wants you to know what it is. But broad scale, general speaking, what are we here to do? Turn to Matthew chapter 28 real quick. This is after Jesus, he died on the cross, and then he rose out of the grave, and he spent some more time walking around the earth, freaking people out, because they all thought he was dead. It was awesome. He walked through the wall. This is after that time. This is after he spent some time back on the earth. He's getting ready to go back to heaven, and he says this to his disciples in verse 19 of Matthew 28. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. This is the very last thing that Jesus spoke to his disciples, to his servants, to his sons and daughters. The very last thing he said to them while on the earth was, I want you to go, and I want you to tell people what I've done for you. I want you to tell people about me. Tell them about my life. Tell them about my work on the cross. Tell them about my resurrection. And tell them how much freedom and joy you have experienced now. Not trying to strive after rules, but rather embracing a relationship with me. I want you to go tell people about me. This is the very last thing Jesus told his servants, his sons and daughters, to do. And you guys, that is the same thing that he has told us to do. Is to go into wherever we are and to make disciples. The actual translation doesn't necessarily mean fly to Tanzania and start a church. It's not exactly what he was trying to say. Some people should be doing that. But what he was actually saying was, go about your business. Go through your day. Do what you need to be doing every day. And while you're doing that, tell people about me. So go to school. And while you're at school, I want you to tell people about me. Go to work. And while you're at work, I want you to tell people about me. Weed whack, wash dishes, clean bathrooms, whatever you're going to do today, in your doing, in your going, in your living, I want you to tell people about me. Because this is the base level command for every single Christian. For every single one of us who has embraced a relationship with Jesus, this is step one. To go about your business, to go through your life, obeying him and telling people about him. To make disciples. To talk about the work of Christ on the cross and what he has done in your own life. This is the answer to the second question, what am I here to do? You guys, we're here to make disciples. And the way Jesus did that was by serving. It was by being second. In Matthew chapter 20, he says, the Son of Man, referring to himself, I did not come to be served, but to serve. In John chapter 13, he got down on his hands and knees and he washed his disciples' feet. You guys, that is unheard of. That was a slave's job. That was not the God of heaven's job. His job, in their minds, that's why Peter, when he's washing their feet, that's why Peter goes, whoa, what are you doing? Because Peter knows, in our society, you don't do this. You're the teacher. We should be washing your feet. But Jesus believed that to make disciples, he had to serve. He had to be second. And so Jesus came to the earth not to be served, but to serve. And that's what he's called us to do, you guys. In our making of disciples, it involves serving them. So I'll just give you for instance, in my work at Target, there's a couple of my buddies there, Nick and Matt. They live in Greensboro, and you guys don't, so you don't know what I'm talking about. But if you do, tell them I said hi, because I won't forget. Anyway, Nick and Matt, they're two of my buddies there. And I know it's my job to try and tell them about Jesus. Specifically these two. I mean, everybody in the store would be awesome, you know. But specifically these two guys, I know that the Lord has called me to talk to them and try and have a relationship with them and introduce them to Jesus. So when I go into work, I'm not just there to stock shelves and to bring people up and take, heavy TVs out to the cars for little old ladies. That's all good stuff, fun stuff. But my work there, my primary work there, is to know that I'm a son of God and to figure out what I can do today to serve the people around me. Okay? Let's pray. Father God, first of all, I thank you so much